I'd like to begin, and first of all, thank you for your organization, what you've done. I mean, AstraZeneca, through several partners, you've been able to work on the vaccines, and you've been able to share quite a bit of this with many countries, including countries in Africa. We are at a
Yep.
stage where the access is very poor. If you look at the numbers, we all know that we are struggling. What,
Yeah.
Qutaiba, what do you think we need to do to change the dynamics, and what do countries need to do? So I'd like to welcome you on stage, and maybe you can take that question first.
Great. Actually, part of my presentation will answer this question, and the answer is the public-private partnerships. I think the key learning from the pandemic is how much we need to work together as government, private sector, and also NGOs in order to tackle and like fight this pandemic. I think COVAX is the best example to show how this collaboration worked beautifully in order to make the vaccine available for the low middle income countries, and how this would help in the equitable access strategy. We are proud that AstraZeneca was the first company to partner with COVAX in order to make the vaccine available for and facilitate the equitable access strategy. And we have other examples as well in order to tackle vaccine hesitancy, to tackle other challenges in Africa and the other parts of the world. But again, we like quick answer for your question. Your question is, of course, the partnership between the different parties.
I see. One of the questions has been that it will be very difficult for any one company to try and bring economies back to normal. So the excess. So there are multiple companies. You know the Pfizer, Moderna.
Yeah.
Later we'll hear about J&J and Aspen. So it is very clear to all of us around the world that multiple companies with high output is what is necessary. We know what happened in India, for example. We were relying a lot on COVAX, and we banked on it so much, Qutaiba, that when India went through a certain situation and the factory in Pune, which was supplying to many of our countries, had to stop, it brought the entire coverage in Africa to a very, very low level. So I think public-private partnership is clear. Multiplicity in manufacturers of different vaccines is very clear. What is AstraZeneca trying to do, especially for Africa, so that we get alternative sources and a high volume being able for us to be accessing in order to save the countries? What's your view? What's your thought?
Yeah, so definitely I totally agree with the first part of your comment regarding that we need multiple suppliers and the players in order to tackle this pandemic. Actually, our CEO Pascal mentioned this in different occasions that we need more than one vaccine in order to tackle the pandemic. So that's why whenever we get questions, when we talk with the governments, when we talk with the media, or sometimes with your families and your friends, that which vaccine is better, or when they compare between vaccines, our answer is clear: the vaccine that is available is the best one. So that's why we need all to work together in order to make the vaccine available. Yes, COVAX faced a lot of challenges in terms of vaccine supply to Africa, especially after the wave that happened in India. And actually, just to correct the information, it was not the manufacturing side that stopped manufacturing. It was the decision by the Indian government, which we understand, considering the situation that happened earlier this year in India, and the need the need for them to focus the vaccine supply into India itself. We are proud that more than 500 million of our vaccine have been produced and supplied in India itself, and it was an integral part in managing the wave and the deterioration that happened in the pandemic situation there earlier this year. The first thing that we are working with our partner SII is to scale up the production in India itself. We started with 60 million. Now we are above 200 million every month, and we are targeting to reach 300 million. This will help us to manage the situation internally in India, and also help the country to take the decision to resume the exports, starting with the COVAX supplies. Other than this, we understand this was out of our hands, of course, and that's why we tried to manage to supply, especially for the second dose, for the people who received the first dose, from other supply chains from AZ, and that's why we worked with COVAX in order to direct supply from different parts of the world into Africa. And this is not an easy, especially from regulatory point of view, because each supply chain need to be approved by the receiving country, and that's why we almost approved all the supply chains of AstraZeneca by WHO in order to enable the receiving countries to rely on the WHO approval and hence receive these quantities either directly from AZ through the COVAX facility or sometimes by donations from government to government, which of course cannot happen without the regulatory approval ahead of this donation. And to facilitate this between different countries in Europe and a lot of different parts of the world with Africa, we know that we have more than around 60 countries receiving the vaccine. It was a bit of a complex process. So to facilitate this, again, we approved all our vaccines, although they were not part of the COVAX supply chain, but we approved them in order to enable this process to happen. So again, maximizing production from SII itself in order to reach to a situation where the government will release the exportation again. Second thing is the approval of all our supply chains and try to supply directly from these supply chains while we are fulfilling other commitments in different continents. The third thing is also the facilitation of all the donations, and we are proud that in Africa, although yes, the quantity is not according to the plan and according to the expectations, but we are proud that at least we contributed. For some countries, it is the first vaccine that was available, protected the first liners, healthcare professionals, and also until now, many countries, it is the only vaccine available. So from the COVAX facility, around 2/3 of the supply that happened, it was AZ vaccine, and majority to low middle income countries, of course, including Africa.
Look, I have taken your vaccine and I've got the 2 doses, and you're right, in some of our countries, that was the only one, and thank you. Let's talk about that the rich have been mopping up the vaccines. There has been this inequity discussion, which is still going on. Now, let's be honest and let's be frank here. Did AstraZeneca, let's just look at the numbers. What percent of your production came to low and middle income countries, like in Africa, and what percent was taken up by Europe and others? And if the percentages are like 90 and 10, it obviously shows you why so many people are vaccinated in other countries while Africa is still low. So did the checkbook influence where your vaccines ended up, and was that a necessity of the economics behind this, or was there geopolitical pressure that your company could do really nothing about it? What happened?
Yeah, so we are proud in AZ, and it makes my job very, very easy that from day one we announced that we will have equitable access strategy and non-for-profit strategy, as you know, and our partnership with Oxford was depending on this strategy. So that's why, quickly. We announced that we exceeded 1 billion doses globally, and I just told you that we supplied India by itself more than 500 million. So if we consider India itself, it's around 50% of our supply. Add to this the supply that happened to the low middle income countries through the COVAX facility, which again, it is 2/3 of the COVAX supply, in addition to the bilateral agreements that happened with also low middle income countries. So we are quite sure that majority of our supply went to the low middle income countries. Everyone knows perhaps the discussion or the challenges that we faced in Europe because we didn't supply according to the plan in Europe itself as well, because the manufacturing process for our vaccine is a biological one, and it needed time until we scaled up according to the expected plan. So, and there was a huge pressure on us in order to supply Europe from manufacturing sites outside Europe, which we focused to continue on our plan on different supply chains and keep COVAX supply chain to COVAX, keep the other supply chain that we had. Each region has its own regional supply chain, so we didn't change this because we believe that we did the right thing from the beginning, which is having a regional supply chains in order to have parallel supply to different parts of the world at the same time. So that's why we are very proud of our strategy, and we are very proud that majority of our supply is going to low and middle income countries.
Thank you. That was a nice conversation to start off your presentation. And I think if it's loaded by the organizers, Qutaiba, I would love you to share with the audience your presentation and want to learn more about where AstraZeneca is going. So over to you.
Thank you. Just to confirm, can you see my presentation?
I can't see it, and maybe Mona can tell us how it's going to come up onto the screen. I can now see a screen. I can see your screen. I can see the slides now and do a slideshow, and this is perfect.
Great. So I think we mentioned a few things that mentioned in the slide. So from the beginning, this is was our commitment that we are providing broad and equitable access at no profit, and that's why we developed supply capacity up to billions of doses that have been realized mid of this year, and we are working closely with our partners in order to supply the commitments to the public health. It's worth mentioning that we are not supplying during the pandemic to the private sector, as we are prioritizing the supply to the government sector. Just focusing on the R&D and where our efforts are going. Of course, not only the Oxford vaccine, as you know, but also the AZD7442, which is a long-acting antibody combination that has potential for both prevention and treatment. It's in phase 3 currently, and we expect to be, we had the first trial, the Provent study, talking about the prevention, which met the primary endpoint, and we expect to submit the file to the US and other parts of the world in Q4, hopefully to hear about it by Q4 of this year. We're also investigating other potential treatments that are targeting the respiratory distress or the immune response, but still it's an earlier phase. Talking about the vaccine, I will not spend too much time on these slides because I think it's well known by now. As you know, it depends on, or it's based on the existing recombinant simian adenovirus vector, which is non-replicating. Of course, the gene responsible for the replication has been eliminated, and it avoids the issues with the pre-existing immunity to human adenovirus. It also proven to induce strong B and T cell response after single vaccination and full vaccination, and we saw from the clinical trials that we have proven effectiveness and safety of this vaccine. The timeline for this vaccine was remarkable. We know that Oxford University had already experience with this vaccine and with this technology previously in the Ebola and other vaccines in the last 10 years. That's why it built on this knowledge and experience, and once the genetic sequence was identified earlier in 2020, around 100 days after that, the first human was receiving the vaccine, which is a remarkable achievement for the human being and for the innovation and the biopharmaceutical industry. The trials started in UK, and then it's expanded to Africa and South Africa, and to South America and Brazil, and later to Kenya, Japan, India, and other parts of the world. Of course, the trials, the major trials were readouts for these trials were revealed in December 2020, and then we got the approval. The first approval was the MHRA, then it followed by the WHO and the EMA approval. So again, collaboration made this possible. The partnership between AstraZeneca and Oxford University allowed us to expand the clinical trials and accelerate this process. Also, one of the advantages between for the partnership between Oxford University and AstraZeneca that we could develop the vaccine manufacturing at scale. So starting with developing the drug product, as you can see, it goes through biological process, starting from the cell infection, then the expansion and the purification, and then the second stage, which is the fill and finish. And labeling, packaging of the products. So these two stages, the drug substance and drug product, it's going on in different manufacturing sites across the world. And one of the advantages with the partnership with AstraZeneca was the ability to have supply chain able to deliver millions of doses until we reach 1 billion doses in mid of this year. It's very important to mention that over 60 tests are performed during this process in order to ensure the quality of our vaccine. We developed more than one supply chain, and it was very important to make sure that the quality of the vaccine is the same regardless of the supply chain, and that's why we do these around 60 quality tests in order to ensure that the quality is the same. Again, with the partnership, the clinical trial and the clinical development plan was accelerated and expanded. It included all the continents in Africa, and it included around 3 countries, South Africa, Kenya, and potentially in Egypt. Not yet started, but it's also expected, and other parts of the world as well. From the clinical trials, quickly we saw that we have prevention against the hospitalization around 100%, 76% efficacy after the first dose, and if the doses, this efficacy can increase up to 82% after the second dose, especially if we reach up to 12 weeks between the 2 doses. Earlier this year, or last year, we saw that the more the interval between the 2 doses, the better efficacy for the vaccine, and this helped a lot of countries in order to vaccinate as much people as they can with the first dose and provide them with acceptable level of protection until the second dose can be provided. This started with in the UK, and a lot of countries, they followed the same strategy. Real-world evidence also showed us that we have very good effectiveness for the vaccine, which is good. 94% effectiveness in preventing hospitalization in the elderly. If you remember, it was a common question because the clinical trials in the beginning didn't include elderly in order to ensure the safety of the population before being enrolled in the trials. That's why the focus in the real-world evidence was on the elderly, and it was even the efficacy higher than the normal population and the elderly. From the first dose, which was also important for some countries, 73% effectiveness, and which helped a lot of countries to vaccinate large population from the first dose. Also 80% effectiveness in preventing hospitalization in elderly and above 80 years from another study in the UK. We saw different variants throughout the pandemic, starting with the UK variant, then the Brazilian and the South African. In all these variants, AstraZeneca vaccine showed good effectiveness. Currently, we have also in phase 3, our booster is designed against the South African variant, and we are hoping to see the results by end of this year. But the most important one is currently, as you know, is the Delta variant, which is currently the dominant variant, and from the real-world evidence that we saw is around 92% effectiveness against hospitalization, and the good thing that we showed also 100% protection against death or no deaths among those who got vaccinated with AZ vaccine. The vaccine also showed that high level of effectiveness against the Alpha variant, which was very common in UK, around 86% reduction of hospitalization, and also no deaths reported among those who got vaccinated. So if we take, and this is especially important for Africa, because it's not about only the effectiveness and the safety. Other aspects that's also important, which is the administration and supply. Sorry. You can hear me now. Great. So the administration and the supply chain is very important, especially for Africa. As you know, AstraZeneca vaccine was among the vaccines that can be stored at normal fridge as other vaccines, as normal vaccines, from 2 to 8, which is of ease for the governments in Africa. Also, the supply chain, the transportation is as other vaccines, which was super helpful for the governments in order to manage within the current infrastructure in these countries. So they didn't need to do any additional investment or burden on the healthcare system in order to develop the infrastructure. From safety, last year we heard a lot of concerns regarding the risk of clotting, and we depend in our response on this one on the regulatory body, the international regulatory body, and their judgment, which all confirm that benefits outweigh the risks, and they confirm that the risk is very minimal, which was added to our leaflet for the vaccine, mentioning the risk and also the way in order to be alert for the signs and symptoms of this risk, and the way in order to manage it, working with the government in order to develop all of these aspects. But again, we depend mainly on the WHO position, EMA position, MHRA position, which all confirm that vaccination is the best way, and they advise to continue vaccination with AZ vaccine, so considering that benefits much outweigh the magnitude of the risk. Moving into how we tackled the vaccine supply, and this is maybe the discussion that we started, and from the beginning maybe we highlighted that the partnership with the government was essential in order to accelerate the development plan, at the same time expand the access, and that's why it was our commitment for equitable access and not for profit from the beginning. We partnered with multilateral organization in order to ensure fair allocation and distribution. Again, AstraZeneca last year was the first company to partner with COVAX, and until now we are the major supplier for COVAX. Around 2/3 of the vaccine supply through COVAX is AZ vaccine. And we also shared technology, and we partnered with supply partners in order to increase the production and distribution, which is also another major step that AZ was leading in it. We shared technology with SII, for example, which is the biggest vaccine manufacturer globally and the main vaccine supplier to Africa. The last one is to expand the work that we have done in order to expand the clinical trials to accelerate the approvals, collaborating with the University of Oxford. After that was going into the implementation and how to take this into action. Of course, the network identification, rapidly identify the supply partners, and then deciding on the strategy and the distinct supply chains in order to supply different parts of the world at the same time. That's why the network strategy, we made sure that we have suppliers for each continent or for each region in order not to in order to be able to supply this continent or region at the same time we are supplying other parts of the world, and then maximizing the supply by initiating the technology transfer and driving the process optimization with our partners and accelerate the procurement and the supply process. In this map, you can see the different suppliers around 12 supply chains or the 12 supply partners in order to fulfill the demand across the globe. Focusing on Africa, you can see that SII is the main supplier. For some countries in North Africa, we also have supplier from Russia called Arfam. So, but main supply is coming from SII. This was the original plan before we had the challenge with the exportation from India. Then we moved into bringing supply from different supply chains, even from Europe, from Japan, from other parts of Asia and other parts of the world into Africa through direct AZ supply and via COVAX facility or by donations from countries to countries. We mentioned this, that around 122 million doses of AZ vaccine to deliver to 129 countries via COVAX, the widest available vaccine in the world. And we are proud that the first vaccine and sometimes the only vaccine in Africa is AZ vaccine. And we hope that with the scale up and all the efforts that we are doing, we will resume supply with much larger quantities into Africa before the end of the year. We're also working with WHO and the developed countries in order to accelerate the donations and the supply from the countries that they have excess of the vaccine into Africa. Our CEO was attending the only CEO attending the G7 summit, in which we encouraged and we facilitated the process of donations, and there was a pledge to deliver more than 1 billion doses to Africa as soon as possible, and we are working with all these countries in order to facilitate this process as fast as possible. Before that, there was also a summit in Japan. We were also worked with WHO, COVAX, and other partners in order to encourage the countries to relocate and donate as much as possible to Africa and other low and middle income countries. And currently we are working also with partners in Africa in order to accelerate this donation process and increase the amount of the donations. Key questions that are still not answered and need, again, public-private partnership in order to answer and put the plans in order to address these challenges in Africa. The first one, how can, of course, accelerate the access to innovation in the future? One of the challenges that we faced during the pandemic, that before doing any supply, you need to get the regulatory approval, and with different regulation system in each country, then you need to submit dossier and you need to do the regulatory work in each and every country. That's why maybe one of the key learning from the pandemic, that the work that was done with WHO in order to approve the vaccines being supplied by COVAX, by WHO, and then the countries were encouraged to rely on the WHO approval in order to accelerate the process. We saw some countries, or majority of the countries, they followed this process, which helped to accelerate the vaccine access in these countries, while other countries who insist on the individual regulatory submission and review, it took longer time, and sometimes it was challenging for the manufacturer itself as AZ to submit for each and every country. So that's why, and we were explaining that our global strategy is to have the WHO approval, and there was a platform with the WHO in order to find all the regulatory documents and the files, and we were not submitting in each and every country. So that's why maybe this is a call for the second question. If we have a common regulatory framework, of course, what we learned from the pandemic, that it will help in order to accelerate the access to innovation. If we have this framework in place, depend on reliance and have one decision making authority that will have an impact on the whole continent, we are very confident that this will help to accelerate the access to innovation and increase the supply, not only for the vaccine during the pandemic, but also for other non-communicable diseases, communicable diseases in the future, which will help to protect people faster and in larger scale. Another issue is not only the vaccine supply, which we like on the surface currently, the urgent issue and the major issue, of course, is the vaccine supply crisis in Africa. And we are not the only company or the only entity working in order to solve this. All the companies are trying to maximize the supply to Africa in order to tackle the situation. But what we see also in the near future, that vaccine hesitancy is also another major issue that we should start today rather than tomorrow in order to tackle this issue, because we need to make sure that once vaccine is available and the supply is resolved, then we can have we will not have this issue in place. Other topic is also the demand for an African solution to the vaccine production, how we can accelerate this process and how we can make sure that it is appealing for the manufacturers as well. That's why regional thinking rather than individual country initiatives would accelerate this. Also, we see it as long-term policy process rather than a short-term solution. So that's why it needs to be thought of, and there needs to be a plan in order to do this with different partners rather than having an individual initiatives from certain countries. Closing with what I started is that government partnership between government, NGOs, and vaccine producers is essential in order to accelerate the vaccine rollout in the coming future, in order to protect the targeted population and reach to the safety and less restriction measures in order to get as much possible to the new normal or to the normal situation as other parts of the world. And thank you very much.